Deep inside the jungles of South Vietnam, American soldiers at a newly established fire support base watched bright flashes ripple through the darkness. Within minutes, the silence shattered as hundreds of mortar rounds crashed into their positions. Dirt, steel, and burning fuel erupted into the night. Then, from the tree line, wave after wave of Viet Cong infantry charged toward the perimeter. The attackers expected another quick victory. Instead, they had chosen one of the worst targets imaginable. March 21, 1967, War Zone C, northwest of Saigon. The United States had launched Operation Junction City, its largest airborne operation of the Vietnam War up to that point. Tens of thousands of American and South Vietnamese troops were sweeping through dense jungle in search of the Central Office for South Vietnam, the elusive headquarters directing communist operations in the South. To support these massive ground operations, engineers carved temporary fire support bases out of the jungle. One of them was Firebase Gold, located near the rubber plantations and forests surrounding the village of Suối Tre. The base was occupied primarily by soldiers from the 2nd Battalion, 22nd Infantry Regiment of the 25th Infantry Division, supported by artillery batteries, armored personnel carriers, and forward observers. Though relatively new, Firebase Gold was becoming a vital anchor for American operations in the region. The Viet Cong understood exactly what the base represented. As long as its artillery remained operational, American infantry could move through the surrounding jungle with devastating fire support only minutes away. Destroying Firebase Gold would cripple Operation Junction City, damage American morale, and demonstrate that even heavily defended positions were vulnerable. The task fell largely to the experienced 272nd Regiment, one of the Viet Cong's most capable formations. Its commanders had studied previous attacks against isolated American positions. They planned to overwhelm the defenders before reinforcements could arrive. Just after midnight, their opening move began. Enemy mortar crews, hidden deep within the jungle, unleashed an intense bombardment. Explosions ripped through the perimeter, collapsing bunkers, damaging communications equipment, and igniting ammunition stores. Soldiers scrambled from their foxholes while medics searched through clouds of dust and smoke for the wounded. For several terrifying minutes, visibility was almost non-existent. Then came the whistles. American troops recognized the sound immediately. It was the signal that the infantry assault had begun. Hundreds of Viet Cong fighters surged from multiple directions under the cover of darkness. Carrying AK-47 rifles, satchel charges, and rocket-propelled grenades, they raced toward gaps in the defensive wire before the stunned defenders could fully recover. Some assault teams reached the outer perimeter within moments. Machine guns opened fire from both sides. Tracer rounds cut glowing lines across the battlefield, while grenades exploded between shattered bunkers. In several sectors, hand-to-hand fighting erupted as attackers forced their way into parts of the American defensive line. For a brief moment, it appeared the base might collapse. But one critical advantage remained untouched. Despite the devastating mortar barrage, several gun crews managed to keep their howitzers operational. Rather than firing at distant targets, they lowered their barrels to extraordinarily low angles and loaded specialized beehive rounds anti-personnel shells packed with thousands of steel flechettes. As the Viet Cong crossed open ground, the guns fired directly into the advancing waves. The effect was catastrophic. The first blasts from the beehive rounds tore through the darkness like giant shotguns. Each 105mm shell burst into thousands of razor-sharp steel flechettes, turning the open ground in front of Firebase Gold into a deadly wall of flying metal. Entire assault groups disappeared beneath the storm. Survivors threw themselves into shell craters, but many continued pressing forward, determined to breach the American defenses before daylight. Along the northern perimeter, several Viet Cong fighters managed to punch through the barbed wire. Satchel charges exploded against bunkers, while automatic weapons fire echoed through the smoke-filled trenches. American infantrymen fought at distances measured in feet instead of yards. Rifles, grenades, machine guns, and even entrenching tools became weapons in the desperate struggle to hold the line. The situation was becoming dangerously close. Radio operators called for every available unit nearby. The defenders knew that if enough attackers reached the artillery positions, the battle could be lost within minutes. Then another critical asset entered the fight: Waiting inside the firebase were armored personnel carriers from Company B, 2nd Battalion, 22nd Infantry. As enemy soldiers poured through damaged sections of the perimeter, the commanders ordered the vehicles forward despite the darkness and confusion. Their engines roared to life, steel tracks crushed sandbags as the armored carriers accelerated directly toward the breakthrough. Mounted 50-caliber machine guns opened fire almost continuously, sending streams of tracer rounds across the battlefield. The vehicles acted like moving strongpoints, sealing dangerous gaps while providing cover for exhausted infantrymen trying to reorganize. The sudden counterattack shocked many of the assaulting Viet Cong units. Instead of finding a collapsing defense, they were now facing coordinated fire from artillery crews, infantry, armored vehicles, and machine gun nests operating together. Still, the attackers refused to withdraw. Fresh waves continued emerging from the surrounding jungle. Some soldiers reached within a few yards of the American gun positions before being driven back. Others crawled through smoke and burning vegetation, using every depression in the ground to close the distance. Inside the firebase, medics worked without pause. Field dressings disappeared almost as quickly as they were opened. Wounded men continued firing from stretchers, while others refused evacuation altogether, choosing to remain with their squads until the attack ended. Commanders realized they needed even greater firepower. Forward observers contacted supporting artillery units across the region. Within minutes, additional batteries began firing defensive barrages around Firebase Gold, creating overlapping explosions that isolated attacking formations before they could reinforce the assault. Then came the sound every American soldier hoped to hear. As dawn slowly approached, U.S. Air Force and Army aviation assets reached the battlefield. Fighter aircraft rolled into attack runs, while helicopter gunships circled overhead, searching for concentrations of enemy troops hidden beneath the jungle canopy. Pilots faced an extremely dangerous problem. American and Viet Cong forces were now so close together that identifying safe targets required incredible precision. Despite the risk, repeated airstrikes blasted assembly areas surrounding the firebase. Rockets slammed into tree lines. Cannons shredded suspected staging positions. In several sectors, napalm strikes ignited walls of flame that forced attacking units to abandon their final assaults. The battlefield transformed completely. Dense jungle became a landscape of smoke, shattered trees, burning brush, and craters. Visibility improved just enough for American commanders to recognize something important. The attacks were beginning to lose momentum. The coordinated assault that had started with overwhelming speed was gradually fragmenting into isolated groups, struggling to maintain communication under relentless artillery and airstrikes. For the first time since the mortars began falling hours earlier, the defenders believed they might actually survive. But the battle was far from over. Scattered Viet Cong units still occupied positions frighteningly close to the perimeter, and isolated firefights continued around damaged bunkers. Every movement outside the wire carried enormous danger, and commanders knew the enemy could launch one final desperate charge before fully withdrawing. The coming hours would determine whether Firebase Gold remained an American stronghold or became another overrun position swallowed by the jungle. By sunrise, the worst was over. The crack of rifles slowly faded, replaced by the rumble of helicopters and the crackling of burning jungle. Smoke drifted across Firebase Gold as exhausted American soldiers cautiously left their fighting positions to secure the perimeter. Everywhere they looked were the signs of a battle that had lasted only a few brutal hours but had consumed enormous amounts of men and firepower. The Viet Cong assault had failed. What had begun as a carefully planned night attack designed to destroy a key American fire support base had instead turned into one of the costliest defeats suffered by the attacking force during Operation Junction City. Outside the defensive wire, the battlefield revealed the true scale of the fighting. American patrols discovered abandoned weapons, destroyed equipment, shattered mortar positions, and large numbers of enemy dead scattered across the approaches to the firebase. Many more wounded had been carried away during the retreat into the surrounding jungle before daylight fully exposed their movements. Inside Firebase Gold, the defenders counted their own losses. Several American soldiers had been killed, and many more were wounded during the relentless mortar barrage and close-range fighting. Bunkers had been smashed apart, sections of the perimeter wire were destroyed. Vehicles bore fresh scars from rockets and automatic weapons fire, while artillery crews inspected guns that had fired almost continuously throughout the night. Yet despite the damage, the base itself still stood. The artillery pieces that the Viet Cong had hoped to silence were already preparing new fire missions in support of American troops operating miles away. Within hours, Firebase Gold had returned to its role supporting Operation Junction City, proving that the attack had failed to achieve its primary objective. Military historians later identified several reasons why the assault collapsed. The initial mortar barrage was devastating, but it failed to completely neutralize the artillery batteries before the infantry assault began. Those surviving gun crews immediately employed beehive round specialized anti-personnel ammunition that transformed each howitzer into an enormous direct-fire shotgun, capable of devastating massed infantry attacks at close range. Equally important was the disciplined response of the defending infantry. Rather than allowing isolated breakthroughs to unravel the defense, officers and non-commissioned officers rapidly shifted men to threatened sectors while maintaining communication under extremely difficult conditions. Their ability to reorganize during the chaos prevented local penetrations from becoming a complete collapse. The presence of armored personnel carriers also proved decisive. Instead of remaining behind the lines, the vehicles were committed directly into the fighting, using their mobility and overwhelming firepower to restore the perimeter at critical moments. Combined with accurate artillery support and precisely coordinated airstrikes after first light, they created a layered defense the attackers could no longer overcome. For the Viet Cong, the battle demonstrated both remarkable courage and the enormous risks of attacking a well-supported American firebase head-on. Their soldiers had crossed open ground under artillery fire, penetrated defensive positions, and fought at point-blank range against determined defenders. But bravery alone could not overcome concentrated firepower, rapid coordination, and overwhelming supporting arms. The Battle of Suối Tre, often remembered through Firebase Gold, became one of the clearest examples of how modern combined arms tactics could defeat even a determined surprise assault. Yet the battle also revealed something larger about the Vietnam War itself. Despite suffering heavy losses, the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces continued to rebuild, recruit, and launch new operations. Tactical victories like Firebase Gold demonstrated American battlefield superiority, but they did not end the conflict. The war would continue for years, growing even more complex both on the battlefield and back home in the United States. For the men who defended Firebase Gold, however, the outcome was unmistakable. In the darkness of March 21, 1967, hundreds of attackers believed they were about to erase an isolated American stronghold from the map. Instead, they encountered disciplined defenders, devastating artillery, armored counterattacks, and overwhelming air support that turned an ambitious assault into a costly defeat. It was a battle measured not only by courage, but by preparation, coordination, and the extraordinary firepower that defined America's way of war in Vietnam. And when the smoke finally cleared over the jungles of War Zone C, Firebase Gold was still standing.